Hi, I wanted to talk to you today about leadership, a word that is used way too much, which I've grown to kind of dislike because it implies a hierarchical relationship in teams and groups of people that you don't necessarily need, but which nevertheless is a concept that does capture certain dynamics that occur in groups either organically because someone steps forward to hold the arrow and point in what direction the group should go, or because the way organizations are organized and you have to have leaders. So I was a leader of sorts for, I don't know, about 25 of my 32 years at CIA. And to this day, I still get asked to talk about what my lessons are for being a leader. And I thought I would capture some of them here, but what I want to do is capture hopefully the ones that are not as obvious and not as cliche, perhaps, as the ones that you've heard. So you can leave a comment and tell me how well I did on that. Hopefully, at least one of the things I'm going to say to you are going to surprise you. So, not quite random leadership lessons from a CIA career. So, there was a guy at the agency who was well into his career when I was a young whippersnapper, if I ever was that. And people would ask him what his lessons were for achieving a senior executive status in the federal government, and that's about as high as you can go unless you're appointed by the president, for example. So senior executives are the equivalent of flag officers, generals, and admirals in the military. And somebody asked him at a meeting what were his secrets to success, and he had a three-word answer that I thought was fabulous. He said there are three things that you need to become a senior leader. You need substance. There's got to be something that you do that you bring to the table that has value for the organization, for the mission. You have style. That's an interesting word. I think in part it talks about emotional intelligence, or it refers to emotional intelligence. But you have to have a way of being that attracts more people than it repels. And then the third thing he said was you have to have savvy. And I think savvy captures all that organizational and social intelligence that you need to have. And also, I think that ability to make the right first step. I think one of the things that is a hallmark of effective leaders, successful leaders, in organizations is that when a situation presents itself to them, they actually intuitively, magically take a first step that is the right step. So they don't have to backtrack. And sometimes the first step may be as simple as just pausing to think about the situation before they do anything else. So those three words, substance, style, and savvy, have for 30, maybe even close to 40 years, that's how long ago I heard this advice, have guided my thinking about leadership. Now, the second thing I'm going to say, which is a lesson from my career, everybody talks about building trust and how a leader and the group that they lead need to trust each other. There has to be a relationship of trust. All well and good. But I don't think what you hear enough of is that trust is a muscle, right? Trust is a verb. What I mean by that is for you to build a muscle, to become stronger, you have to use that muscle. You have to exert it. Sometimes in weightlifting and other activities like that, you have to exert it to the point where it could fail, where it gets tired, where it aches, where it's difficult. And that's how I think leaders, and all of us really, should think about trust. I find that the word mistrust is often misused You'll say, oh, I'm going to trust Betty to do this important task because she's done this kind of task before. That is not a moment of trust. If she has a track record in doing this type of task, you're not really trusting her. You have confidence in her. You believe she can do it. Trust, much harder, is when you ask someone or give someone a task or a responsibility that you're not quite sure they're going to perform correctly, but you do believe they're at that point in their experience or their learning that it's worth the risk to give them that challenge. That's trust. And you build trust in other people, and other people learn to trust themselves and their own abilities when you, in fact, give them that opportunity even when you're not sure that they're going to succeed. That's the moment of trust. And I think that one of the reasons why organizations don't flourish and people don't flourish in organizations is that they're not trusted. They have to prove themselves first. They get caught in this horrible catch-22 that makes no sense. So as a leader, purposefully trust people. Exercise that muscle. No pain, no gain. The third thing I want to talk about, and I did a real quick leadership short about it a couple of days ago, I want to talk about empathy. And of course, empathy and trust are kind of cousins, and everyone says that leaders should exhibit a lot of empathy. But this advice rarely comes with a practical, specific thing for you to do that helps you be empathetic. And I have an example, something that has guided my career for a long time, that I want to give you, a particular technique that you can use or a habit that you can grow into. I believe that it's really important for leaders, really for all of us, to conduct ourselves in such a way that we avoid embarrassing other people. That feeling of embarrassment, or it's, the even worse condition of being humiliated, is one of the worst feelings a human being can have. I think it's probably second only to intense grief. And yet, oftentimes in organizational situations, in a team setting, something will happen, somebody will say something that embarrasses another person. They make a snide remark. They say something sarcastic, or they go, "What were you thinking?" And those kinds of expressions and those kinds of responses to people can embarrass them. And embarrassment is very painful. I realized this actually after 9/11, when I was reading the biographies of the 19 men who took their lives and did these horrible things, and obviously took the lives of so many other people. And I was just, I was just trying to figure out what drove them to do this. And when I read their biographies and thought about it, what I think many of them, most of them have in common is feelings of humiliation, of embarrassment. So a great way to operationalize empathy is to conduct yourself in such a way that your number one goal in interactions, particularly with people you don't know well, is to avoid embarrassing them. I think about this all the time. It's the principle through which I filter my comments. I'll be in a meeting, I'll be listening to a stupid presentation, I think I'm gonna say this, and then I go, no, I need to find a more careful way of saying this so that it does not come across as so personal. So don't embarrass people, and you will improve your empathy quotient by a significant degree. The fourth one I want to talk about, and this is one I just learned last week. I was doing a Hispanic Heritage event, and one of my co-panelists was talking about his rule, and he said this very quick phrase. He believes in connection before correction. Hallelujah. So simple, right? For you to provide constructive criticism to them, to a person, for them to hear what you have to say in an open way, you have to have created a relationship. You know, when someone whom I don't know says something kind of nasty to me, you know, maybe when you're driving or something, I'm like, who the heck are they? You know, they don't know me. They don't know my situation. So be sure to connect to people before you correct them. And that is why in my entire career, when I was asked to describe my management philosophy, I always had a one-word answer: conversation. Conversation is the lubricant through which we as humans connect. And having a good conversation with people, an empathetic one, where you're not criticizing them, is one of the very best ways. In fact, it is the way to make connections. So I just love that phrase, connection before correction. Thank you, Jose. The next thing I want to talk about is something that I call discretionary energy. I think other people have used that phrase as well. And let me explain what I mean by discretionary energy. If you have a team and they are executing their jobs exactly the way their job descriptions require, you know, they're spending their 40 hours a week and they're doing their 2 projects a year or whatever those contractual requirements are. If that's what's going on in your team, are you having excellence? I ask a lot of groups that question, and inevitably people shake their heads no. If everyone performs to the letter of their written contract, of their obligation, that is not enough to produce excellence in a team. What produces excellence in almost any situation, and what produces your own great results, is when you get excited about a project, a goal, and you give it your discretionary energy. That energy which you do not have to give, nobody can force you to give it. In fact, most people probably don't know what level of effort represents your discretionary energy, and yet you're excited about it to voluntarily give it. One of the real ironies of management, of leadership, is that to have excellence, you need a lot of people giving their all, their discretionary energy to a mission, but you as a manager or leader rarely know what level of effort represents someone's discretionary energy. Really, only if you've known this person for decades and have worked with them before and have seen them through their ups and downs, do you have any hope of understanding what level of effort they're capable of. So discretionary energy is not something, there's no cookie cutter recipe. I know how people love that cookie cutter stuff. There is no cookie cutter recipe for creating a situation where people want to give their discretionary energy. But there's a clue in that last sentence. You facilitate a situation where people offer up their discretionary energy. It's like you create a situation that motivates the people to do that. And you do that by being empathetic, connecting before correcting, exercising your trust muscle. All of those things contribute to an environment where people want to give their discretionary energy. So, and by the way, it's not just a responsibility of the manager to do that. Everybody on the team can help create that environment. And that's one of the really bad consequences of letting assholes ruin your team. You know, they may be a high performer, but they're kind of an idiot and nobody really likes them, because what they do is create a situation where the other people don't maximize their contributions because they're just not happy. So discretionary energy, the key to great performance, and a mysterious key for which there is no cookie cutter recipe. There was a book I read, and I'll find the book and I'll put a link in the description. Oh, probably 20 years ago, by someone, Ron Heifetz, I think is his name. He was a leadership professor at Harvard University. And he wrote a book, I believe it's called Leadership on the Line. And he had a phrase in that book, which I'm probably paraphrasing here, but I love the phrase. And it is that leadership is disappointing your followers at a rate they can tolerate. Slightly cynical, very much real life. But I think that when you are a manager, you can't always, even if you have great relations with the people on your team, with your group, you can't always do the thing that will please the most people. There will be moments when maybe you're going to have to agree to do something from, higher up that you don't think is the best idea, or there's not enough money to reward everyone for the great job they've done, so you have to make some difficult choices. We can all think of many examples where we have to compromise on what we think really is the best thing to do. That's actually one of the reasons why leaders exist in the first place. Someone has to take the heat when conditions force you to do something suboptimum. At that point, the key, the art to being a great leader is disappointing your followers, the people whom you lead, at a rate they can tolerate. And the one thing I would add to Heifetz's statement, which I don't think he includes in the book, is, I've learned that being an effective leader means that you are able to disappoint your followers at a rate they can tolerate, and you're kind of also able to disappoint yourself at a rate you can tolerate, right? I mean, you think of all the wrong steps you did, or you wonder back on a difficult choice you made and you still question whether or not it was the right choice. Or maybe, like you can actually think back on things you did that you feel were really against your sense of integrity and moral code, and you kind of flinch every time you think about it. It's almost, it is an embarrassment, like a self-humiliation. Those things, for you to survive and prosper as a human, those things have to occur to a degree and at a rate that you can tolerate as an individual. So I love this advice, not just for leaders, but for all of us, that we have to be able to forgive ourselves, because no one goes through life with an unblemished record. Now, related to this, and I've got just this one and one more to offer you. Related to this is a way I thought about my leadership actions on a day in and day out basis. I always thought that as a leader that I was building a bank account. In normal times, in happy days, I was creating trust, building trust, creating goodwill, creating confidence in my decisions. And that all of that was going into my leadership account. And that I needed to grow it as much as I could for those times when I might disappoint them, when I might have to do something by fiat because there just wasn't enough time to discuss all the complexities of the situation and satisfy everyone's concerns on the team. Those situations arise, particularly, I worked at CIA, where there's a lot of pressure and a lot of time demands and cranky policymakers. And so therefore, you often have to do things that maybe your team doesn't agree with. And so your leadership account, all that goodwill that you've built up in normal times, is what you draw from to survive that moment and continue going forward and prospering. And what happens, the way this works, I think, is it's much harder to build up your leadership account. And then, it goes up incrementally, just like our real life savings accounts. But when that crisis situation occurs, boy, it draws down quickly. When when a tree falls on your house, a lot of that savings account gets spent. So I thought, as a corollary to this, that I have to be very careful and not draw down on my leadership account unnecessarily, sort of like unforced errors. So I think a lot of the kind of silly rules that immature and inexperienced or malevolent leaders will make, like, you can only have a 30-minute lunch, and if you're not back at the 31st minute, you're in trouble, and you say something about it. Talk about embarrassing a person. Or you kind of insist that people, nobody leave before you leave. All these petty power games that leaders have. Well, they're bad in and of themselves. They're stupid in and of themselves. But even more so, from a kind of practical perspective, they're reducing your leadership account unnecessarily. So when a really important situation arises and you really have to draw upon that leadership gene, you're not going to have anything left in your account. So that's my next to last piece of advice. The last piece of advice I'm going to give you is something that is the first piece of leadership advice I ever got in my entire life. I was going to Georgetown to graduate school, and there was a professor there, William Stearman. He was a State Department official who had a very good career, and he was very likable, and he had a bunch of the students over, I don't know, for dinner or drinks or something at Georgetown. And my memory is, and we all know our memories aren't that great, but my memory is that as I was leaving, he stopped me and he said, "Carmen, you're going to be a leader someday," which took me totally aback. I had no concept of what I was going to be or do or achieve. And he said, "You're going to be a leader someday, and I have one piece of advice for you." He says, "When you become a leader, be lazy." And I was like, what is he saying? Why would I be lazy? It took me many, many years to understand what he was saying. Don't do everything yourselves. Trust other people to do things. Delegate. Don't micromanage. All of those things are encompassed in his advice to be lazy. I loved it. And I still mention it to leadership groups, or to groups that I talk to about leadership to this day. So there you are. Those are my favorite maxims on leadership. I hope at least one of these surprised you. If you enjoyed it and would like YouTube to let you know when I do another one of these, hit the subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything. It's perfectly free. And also like the video, or even comment, as I said, because that kind of interaction on videos actually helps YouTube recognize what people are reacting to in a positive or negative way. So anyway, if you're here and you listened all the way through, yay, thank you, and I'll talk to you again soon.